Thomson Safety Training for Hazard Communication and the Globally Harmonized System. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard, or commonly referred to as HAZCOM, became effective in 1983. Originally, it only applied to general industry. However, in 1989, OSHA required the HAZCOM standard to be followed in the construction industry as well. In 2014, HAZCOM adopted the worldwide standard known as GHS, or the Globally Harmonized System. Some of the changes to HAZCOM included Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDSs, are now known as Safety Data Sheets, or SDS. Safety data sheets were standardized and now contain 16 sections. Container labels now use a standardized format worldwide. Pictograms showing the chemical hazard are standardized, and the numbering system for hazard identification changed. The HAZCOM standard deals with hazardous chemicals in the workplace. It is important because chemical exposure may cause or contribute to many serious health effects such as heart ailments, central nervous system damage, kidney and lung damage, sterility, cancer, and others. Chemicals can present physical and health hazards. A physical hazard is a chemical for which there is scientifically valid evidence that it is a combustible liquid, a compressed gas, explosive, flammable, an organic peroxide, an oxidizer, pyrophoric, unstable, or water reactive. Health hazards are chemicals that can cause chronic or acute health effects in employees exposed to them. These include chemicals which are carcinogens, toxic agents, reproductive toxins, irritants, corrosives, sensitizers, nephrotoxins, neurotoxins, and agents which damage the lung, skin, eyes, or mucous membranes. The purpose of the standard is simple: to ensure that employers and employees know about work hazards and how to protect themselves. Right-to-know stations are a good example. This is where the safety data sheets, or SDSs, are kept and are available to employees. They could be in a binder listing all the chemicals on site with their corresponding SDS, or a computer-based system. The HAZCOM standard has four main components: the Written Hazard Communication Program, container labeling, safety data sheets, and employee training. Under the HAZCOM standard, the employer has certain responsibilities. The employer must identify and list all chemicals, both hazardous and non-hazardous, in their workplaces. They must obtain safety data sheets and container labels for each chemical present in the workplace. They must implement a written HAZCOM program and must communicate chemical hazard information to all employees through safety data sheets, container labels, and formal HAZCOM training programs. The written HAZCOM program has several requirements. It must describe the container labeling, safety data sheets, and employee training for each workplace. It should list all of the chemicals, hazardous and non-hazardous, present in the workplace, and it makes information regarding hazards and protective measures available to other employers who may be on site. For container labeling in the workplace, the hazard warning must use the GHS standardized labels that provide the required information on the hazards of the chemicals and the targeted organs affected. The labels must be legible and in English, plus other languages if needed, and prominently displayed. According to OSHA, the manufacturer, importer, or distributor of the chemicals is required to label each container of chemicals. If the chemicals are transferred into an unmarked container, those containers must be labeled with the same information as the original container, and the labels must meet GHS requirements. The only exception is if the chemical is to be used immediately. For example, if a chemical is poured into a bucket to be transferred immediately, it needs no label on the bucket. Material classification is a very important part of the HAZCOM standard. Hazard classification is displayed both numerically and by color code. The new GHS system ranks hazards from 1 to 5, number 1 being the most hazardous and 5 being the least. For example, gasoline would be a 1 and water would be a 5. In comparison, the HMIS NFPA ranking is 0 to 4, with 0 being the least hazardous and 4 being the most hazardous. A safety data sheet, commonly referred to as an SDS, must be acquired and maintained by the employer for every chemical used and stored on the job site. HAZCOM and GHS require that they be standardized in format and contain 16 parts. Some of the highlights include the name of the chemical and manufacturer, the physical hazards, such as will it catch on fire or explode, its health hazard, such as the signs and symptoms of exposure, the routes of exposure into the body, such as inhalation, emergency and first aid procedures, and control measures, such as ventilation and spill cleanup. If no safety data sheet has been received for the chemical, the employer must contact the supplier or manufacturer to obtain one and maintain a record of the contact. Training is a key element of every company's HAZCOM program. It represents one of the most effective methods of teaching employees about the chemicals they are exposed to or may become exposed to on a job site. During training, employees should receive an explanation of the HAZCOM program, including information on safety data sheets, labels, and how to obtain and use this information about the hazards. Training is also required when the employee is assigned to any location where there might be exposure to hazardous chemicals and anytime a new chemical is introduced into the work area. Employee HAZCOM training should also discuss protective measures such as engineering controls, work practice controls, and the use of personal protective equipment or PPE. Finally, it must include information on how to detect the presence or release of a hazardous chemical using monitoring devices and observation methods. The Hazard Communication Standard was created for your safety. You should take full advantage of the safety data sheets and right-to-know stations. Equip yourself with the knowledge you will need to work safely with all hazardous and potentially hazardous chemical substances in your workplace, and be prepared to address any type of exposure.